These are the lecture notes for Chapter 8 on cellular respiration. I was looking to see if, there we go. Okay, so this is the overall equation for cellular respiration. It's glucose plus oxygen forms carbon dioxide and water and energy. In cellular respiration, the two reactants are glucose and oxygen. And glucose is oxidized and oxygen is reduced. So make sure that you know that. Make sure you know which one is oxidized and which one is reduced. Oops. Sorry, I'm trying to underline. Okay, so glucose is oxidized and oxygen is reduced during cellular respiration, and then make sure that you know the overall equation for cellular respiration. Okay, there are four reactions or four phases of cellular respiration. Two of them are listed here. The first phase of cellular respiration is glycolysis. Lysis means breakdown, glyco means glucose. So glycolysis is the first reaction where glucose is broken down, and it occurs in the cytoplasm. Then we have the preparatory or prep reaction. Every reaction besides glycolysis actually occurs in the mitochondria. So glycolysis, the prep reaction, the citric acid cycle, and the electron transport chain are the four phases of cellular respiration. So you can see from this illustration that glycolysis occurs in the cytoplasm of the cell, and then the other three phases of cellular respiration occur in the mitochondria. Glycolysis, just to show you what it looks like. There we go. Okay, so glycolysis is actually a series of 10 chemical reactions. We're not going to learn the details. We're just going to learn the summary. So I would expect you to be familiar with this slide, which is slide number 14, and this gives you a summary of what occurs during glycolysis. But let's go back to the notes. We know that glycolysis occurs in the cytoplasm, outside the mitochondria. You also need to know that glycolysis produces 2 total ATP molecules. Now, overall, the process of cellular respiration produces 36 to 38 ATP molecules. So only 2 of those are produced during glycolysis. Glycolysis starts out with glucose. So that's listed under the inputs. Make sure that you know glycolysis requires glucose, an input of glucose, and then glycolysis produces 2 molecules of pyruvate, 2 NADHs, and a total of 2 ATP. So 2 pyruvate, 2 NADH, and 2 ATP. And we're going to talk about the importance of NADH in the last phase of cellular respiration, but for now we're just going to record whenever NADH is produced. Now, glycolysis is anaerobic. That means it does not require oxygen. If there is no oxygen available, the other phases of cellular respiration will not proceed. And what will happen is a process called fermentation. So fermentation also occurs outside the mitochondria, and it includes glycolysis, but it does not involve the other 3 phases. It does not involve the prep reaction, citric acid cycle, or electron transport chain. So when oxygen is not available to the cell, fermentation will take place in the cytoplasm. When oxygen is available to the cell, then aerobic cellular respiration will proceed in the mitochondria. Fermentation is anaerobic. That means it does not require oxygen. There are two types. There's alcoholic fermentation. Yeast, which are a member of the kingdom fungi, carry out alcoholic fermentation. And what they do is they break down glucose and produce carbon dioxide and ethyl alcohol or ethanol as a byproduct. Alcoholic fermentation, you probably know, is used in the production of, it says alcoholic spirits, so in the production of alcohol that people drink or consume, and also in the production of bread. So the same process really that's used to produce beer is used to produce bread. But the difference is in the bread, the carbon dioxide shows up as the spongy air spaces in the bread. Whereas in beer, it's the foam. And then in bread, the alcohol is burnt off in the cooking process. The second type of fermentation is lactic acid fermentation. Some bacteria and some fungi carry out lactic acid fermentation. We use, and the product of lactic acid fermentation is lactic acid or lactate. This process is used commercially to produce cheese, yogurt, and sauerkraut and other fermented products. One that's listed down here is acetic acid. There are bacteria that are used commercially to prepare or to produce acetic acid, which is vinegar. So that's just a little interesting detail. Now, fermentation is shown here on slide 26. You can see that basically fermentation begins just like glycolysis, and glycolysis proceeds all the way to where glucose is broken down into 2 pyruvate molecules. And in the process, there is a net gain of 2 ATPs. But the difference is in fermentation, the pyruvate is then converted either to lactic acid or lactate or alcohol and carbon dioxide. So animals and bacteria carry out lactic acid fermentation. In animals, that fermentation is carried out in the muscle cells. When we exercise and you start to feel that burn, that is when our cells are no longer taking in enough oxygen to carry out aerobic cellular respiration. So our muscle cells actually start to carry out lactic acid fermentation. And they will produce a small amount of ATP, but also will produce lactic acid, and the muscles will start to burn. So plants and yeast carry out alcoholic fermentation, and they will produce alcohol and carbon dioxide as a byproduct. The advantages of fermentation are that fermentation provides a quick burst of ATP, a quick burst of energy for muscle activity in animals. Disadvantages are that the products are toxic to cells. So lactate and alcohol are toxic to cells. It actually kills the yeast that produce the alcohol. And even though it's a quick burst of energy, there's only 2 ATP produced per glucose molecule, which is as compared with aerobic respiration is going to be 36 or 38 molecules of ATP. So it's the efficiency is really, really reduced. The efficiency for aerobic cellular respiration is like 39%, and it's only 2.1% in fermentation. Okay, so here's a summary of fermentation. The input would be glucose, and then the products will either be 2 lactic acids and 2 ATPs, or 2 alcohols and 2 carbon dioxide along with 2 ATPs. Now, we're going to move on and complete our discussion of aerobic cellular respiration. We covered glycolysis. Glycolysis is the first step, and it occurs in the cytoplasm. But the next 2 steps occur in the mitochondria along with the last step. The prep reaction and the citric acid cycle both occur inside the mitochondria. In the prep reaction, pyruvate is converted to acetyl-CoA, and no ATP are produced in the prep reaction. So here is a summary of the prep reaction. We start out with pyruvate, and then pyruvate is converted into 2 molecules of acetyl-CoA, which stands for coenzyme A, which is attached to an acetyl group. So 2 molecules of acetyl-CoA, 2 carbon dioxide, 2 NADH, but 0 ATP, and that's really important. The prep reaction produces 0 ATP molecules. Glycolysis produced 2. The prep reaction produces 0. Now we're going to move on to the citric acid cycle, and the citric acid cycle is also called the Krebs cycle. It occurs in the mitochondria, and the products are primarily, the purpose of the citric acid cycle primarily is to produce these molecules called NADH and FADH2. They are going to be used in the last step, the electron transport chain. The hydrogen atoms on the end of those molecules is going to provide a source of electrons and hydrogen ions for the electron transport chain. And instead of making the electron transport chain difficult, remember that we learned how the electron transport chain works in photosynthesis in Chapter 7. So it's going to be the exact same thing in Chapter 8. In cellular respiration, the electron transport chain step is going to be identical to how it was in Chapter 7 in photosynthesis. So the molecules that enter the citric acid cycle are acetyl-CoA, and the products are going to be a total of 4 carbon dioxide, because the citric acid cycle will turn twice per glucose molecule. So it would be 4 carbon dioxide total, 2 ATPs, 6 NADHs, and 2 FADH2s. And this is a picture of the citric acid cycle, but the main thing is that you understand that the inputs to the citric acid cycle are 2 acetyl-CoA molecules, and the outputs are 4 carbon dioxide, 6 NADH, 2 FADH2, and 2 ATP. So we have covered all the way through the 3rd phase of cellular respiration. You may have been keeping track. Glycolysis produced 2 ATP molecules, and the citric acid cycle is going to produce 2 ATP molecules. What that means is that the rest of the ATP molecules are going to be produced during the electron transport chain, and I will cover the electron transport chain in the next recording.